After saving money for 12 years, I finally bought my dream apartment, only for my ungrateful parents to try to force me to sell it because it's too big and I should help them pay their medical debt. Instead, so I kicked them out, but not even 2 weeks later, my parents try to do this so I get them arrested. I fulfilled the dream of my life. I bought an apartment for myself. All my life, all I have ever wanted is to own a place of my own. That's it. Growing up, my parents never let me have my own room, but it was also because I was born into a lower-income household and we didn't have much. My parents were not prepared to be parents. They had me not because they desired a child, but because of pressure from their families. In our culture, staying child-free is heavily stigmatized. Hence, our relatives basically pressured my parents to have at least one child to fulfill societal expectations, and so I was born, not out of love or readiness, but out of obligation. While my parents had no savings and barely managed to scrape by, I was an added expense on them. We lived in the cheapest accommodations they could find, often places that were small, poorly maintained and downright unsafe at times. Even then, affording rent was a struggle. I can still remember nights when we skipped meals pretending we weren't hungry just to make sure we didn't run out of the little food we had left. My clothes were always hand-me-downs or donations, often ill-fitting or worn thin, but they were all we could manage at the time. The few toys or items I owned were sometimes donated by strangers. My dad worked in a factory that paid him barely enough to keep us afloat. Unfortunately, even the little he earned wasn't always used responsibly since he had a gambling problem. My mom, on the other hand, occasionally worked as a cleaner, but her priorities were also only towards her own indulgences, doing her hair, getting her nails done, or buying cigarettes. Little was left for essentials, let alone anything that might make life easier for me. I went to public school and from the very beginning I realized I didn't quite fit in with the rest of my classmates. My clothes were often dirty, my hair unkempt, and I lacked the basic hygiene and appearance that most of my classmates took for granted. This made me an easy target for bullying. I still vividly recall how cruel some of my classmates were to me. They would tease me, mock how I smelled, and ridicule the way I looked. As a child, I always struggled with poor eyesight and desperately needed glasses, so I begged my parents for weeks to get me a pair. And after almost a month of pleading, they finally relented, though begrudgingly. When I finally got my glasses, I was overjoyed. For the first time, the world came into focus. I could see clearly. I could read better, and I felt like I finally had a chance to excel in school. But my happiness didn't last long. My bullies in class broke my glasses just for fun and I was left devastated. I was too scared to tell my parents what had happened. I knew how they would blame me for being irresponsible or careless rather than understanding the situation. I felt utterly helpless, but luckily, a kind teacher at school stepped in. She noticed what had happened and without making a fuss or embarrassing me further, helped me get another pair of glasses. She didn't tell my parents about it, which was a huge relief. Throughout my childhood and teenage years, I never felt happy at my home. My parents were deeply unhappy in their own lives and marriage and always channeled that frustration towards me. My dad was strict to the point of cruelty. He would scold me if I so much as made a sound and I felt like I was walking on eggshells around him every single day. My mom was just as controlling, though in different ways. She micromanaged every aspect of my social life, dictating who I could talk to and which friends I could have. She constantly urged me to make friends only with children who were upper middle class or better off than us. At the end of the day, according to my parents, all I was supposed to do was keep my head down and study hard. They would constantly remind me that I needed to save them from poverty, and they believed the only way I could achieve that was through exceptional academic performance. My success wasn't about me, it was about them and their dreams of escaping hardship. When they realized I was naturally good at schoolwork early on in my life, their excitement was overwhelming. My parents took every opportunity to brag to their friends or neighbors about my achievements as if they did anything to help me. My parents weren't interested in my well-being or happiness. They were only concerned with what I could do for them. I carried the weight of their expectations on my shoulders and it often felt suffocating. When I applied to college and received a full scholarship due to my academic excellence and low-income background, it felt like a glimmer of hope amidst years of struggle. My parents were overjoyed. In their minds, my college education was a golden ticket to a better life for them. They believed I would land a high-paying job after graduating and that would transform their lives, allowing them to escape the poverty and hardships they had always known. However, once I arrived at college, my perspective began to change. Being away from home for the first time was a revelation. For the first time, I experienced what it was like to live without the constant shadow of their control, expectation, and anger hanging over me. I realized that I wasn't obligated to live my life solely for their benefit. Hence, I started to slowly detach myself from them. I refused to meet them when they came to visit me at college, citing busyness with academics or work. I stopped going home during vacations and instead spent holidays with my college friends whose homes were warm, inviting and far removed from the toxic environment I'd grown up in. When I began working part-time to support myself, I hid this information from my parents as I didn't want them to take my money. Throughout all this, my parents were very unhappy with my behavior and couldn't understand why I had changed. Once they found out about my part-time job, they demanded I send money back home. When I refused, they berated me over the phone, hurling insults and accusations, calling me ungrateful and spoiled. They even resorted to threats claiming that if I didn't send the money, they would show up at my college unannounced to embarrass me or worse talk to my friends about how selfish I was to not help out my own parents after all the sacrifices they had done. In the end, I had no choice but to send them money. When I graduated, I saw it as my chance to finally break free. I secured a job in another city and left overnight without telling them. I changed my phone number hoping to cut all ties and start fresh. For a while, it worked. I felt a sense of relief and independence that I had never known before, but my peace didn't last long. Somehow, one of my relatives shared my whereabouts, and my dad eventually found me at my workplace. I was filled with rage seeing his face. When I confronted him, he berated me for cutting off all contact with him and started to tell me how, as his daughter, I could not just abandon him and mom. I pointed out to him that I wanted nothing to do with him and asked him to leave. However, my dad told me that judging from my office building and my designer clothes, he felt I had definitely secured a good-paying job. I tried to refuse, but he wasn't fooled. He then told me I needed to start sending him $500 every month without fail and claimed that this was the only way he or mom would stop bothering me. I was furious, not just at his audacity, but at the realization that even after all these years, my parents still saw me as nothing more than a resource to exploit. It was extortion, plain and simple. They weren't interested in my happiness or my success. They only cared about what they could take from me. I could have refused him, but this was my first job just fresh after college and I didn't want my parents to mess my career up by showing up to my workplace again and again or even tattling to my boss or coworker about our family issues. That would just be embarrassing. So I agreed to give in to his demand. For the past 12 years, I have sent money back home every month just to stop my parents from coming back into my life. Currently, I earn really well and the $500 I send back home doesn't mean a lot to me. It only brings me peace since they haven't bothered me ever again. They do keep tabs on me from social media or through my relatives, but they have not demanded anything else. I have no idea what they do with this money, and I have never bothered to ask them. Recently, when I bought this apartment for myself, I decided to throw a grand housewarming party. I knew there was a chance my parents would find out through social media. For the first time in my life though, I didn't care. I wanted to celebrate this huge milestone in my life. Unsurprisingly, my parents did find out about my new house through social media. My mom called shortly after seeing the posts. Her voice dripped with accusation as she asked why she and my dad hadn't been invited to the party. I answered bluntly, sending the money every month was more than enough. I didn't see the need to have them in my life on top of that. My honesty clearly offended her. She launched into one of her usual tirades going on about how children are supposed to live for their parents and insisted that every other parent she knew had a good relationship with their kids, and that I was the one exception. She demanded to know why I hated her and my dad so much and why I couldn't just get over the past and be an ideal child to them. I had heard all this before and I wasn't in the mood to entertain it further. I tried to make up an excuse that I was busy and didn't have time or patience to listen to her lecture, but this time, she didn't hang up. Instead, she told me that this wasn't the only reason why she had called me. This is when her tone shifted. She then went on to say that my dad had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in the past 2 months. I was stunned. This was the first I'd heard of it. For a moment, I didn't know how to react. I mean, I really doubted whether or not she was speaking, but if it was really the truth, then I didn't want my dad to suffer this way even though he and I are not close anymore. Over the years, I had hated my parents so much, but now hearing about his dreadful disease, I felt a bit sympathetic. I asked Mom why she didn't tell me about this earlier. Mom confessed that she and my dad felt guilty to inform me when they had already been taking $500 from me every month. However, she went on to justify that neither of them could have survived without my money. They had both only earned minimum wage and my money had really helped them over the years. However, now with my dad losing his job after his diagnosis, their financial situation has worsened even more. My mom's part-time work simply wasn't enough to cover even basic needs, let alone the added medical expenses. She went on to beg me to meet with them, emphasizing that it might be too late for my dad if I didn't come and visit him soon. She said that nothing would make him happier than seeing his only child come to check in on him. Her words were emotional, almost desperate, and for the first time in years, I felt a pang of guilt. It wasn't because I believed I owe them anything, but because I couldn't ignore the gravity of the situation. My dad might have been a deadbeat father, but he was still my father, and now he has cancer. I didn't even know how serious it was, what stage, what his prognosis was, or whether he truly didn't have much time left. After mulling it over for a couple of days, I made a decision. I would give them one last chance. I couldn't visit them because of my work, but I would let them visit me instead. However, it would be on my terms. I booked bus tickets for them to travel to my city and arranged for them to stay at a hotel for one night. I decided not to have them stay with me in my apartment as I wasn't ready for that level of closeness. However, I had invited them over to my place for lunch so we could sit down and talk. The day my parents came to visit, I wasn't sure what to expect. As soon as I saw my dad, it was clear that he was seriously ill. He looked frail, tired, and could hardly walk properly. He handed me a stack of medical records and hospital bills as proof, and as I looked through them, I realized that my mom had spoken the truth. This wasn't some manipulative ploy. They weren't lying about his cancer. The cold, hard reality of his diagnosis was laid out in those documents. During our conversation, my dad surprisingly apologized to me for his past behavior. He told me how sorry he was to have asked me for money every month. I nodded in understanding for a moment. It felt like he might truly understand how much his actions had cost me emotionally. We then talked about my life here and my work throughout their visit. My parents kept saying how proud they were to see me living in such a luxurious apartment on my own. They couldn't believe I had such a large, well-furnished space all to myself. They commented once or twice on how it was too big for just a single person like me. My mom casually mentioned how she would love to stay at my place for a few days and explore the city since they'd never been here before. I immediately shut her plan down. I reminded her that I'd already paid for the hotel for their one-night stay and their return bus tickets. If they didn't leave as planned the next day, then they'd have to figure things out on their own because I wouldn't be helping them. My mom was silent, clearly taken aback. My dad asked why I couldn't be kinder to them, especially since this was the first time we'd even seen each other in so many years. His tone suggested that he thought my coldness was unjustified, that it wasn't fair of me to treat them this way. I scoffed, unable to hold back all the resentment that had been building inside me for years, and pointed out to them that both of them had done nothing for me growing up, nothing to nurture or support me emotionally or materially. They had treated me like their golden goose, exploiting my academic success for their own benefit while giving me little in return. I reminded them that despite everything that had happened between us, I was still sending them money every month. Over the years, they had never once checked up on me or been there on my bad days. The only reason they were even here was because Dad had cancer. Hence, they can't really blame me for how I feel. I don't have any attachment to them anymore. Hearing this, my dad's face went red in embarrassment and my mom burst into tears. I guess I was a bit too mean, but this was the complete truth. I could have easily cut them off financially, but I hadn't. The $500 a month I sent them every month was a way to keep them at arm's length. Sending money was easier than dealing with their drama every other month. It kept them quiet, prevented them from showing up and embarrassing me, and most importantly ensured that no one in my new life found out about my deeply dysfunctional and toxic family. My parents were a constant source of shame, and I wanted to keep their existence far away from the life I'd built for myself in this city. So, anyways, after having lunch, I asked them to go back to the hotel since I felt like we had talked enough. But apparently my dad wasn't finished. He stopped me and said he had something else to ask. Instantly, I knew this was their plan all along. Clearly, they hadn't just come to see me because they missed me. There was always an ulterior motive when it came to them. I asked him straight up what it was that he wanted from me this time. This is when my dad began to beg. He literally pulled out his medical bills again, pointing to the overwhelming costs of his treatment, and said that he simply couldn't afford to pay those bills. He told me that he knew how shameless this seemed, but that he was hoping I could step in to help. I firmly told him that I wouldn't be doing that since sending them money every month was more than what they deserved. My dad then gestured to my apartment and pointed out that if I could afford to buy such a luxurious place, then surely I could afford to pay for his cancer treatment. He begged me that he had no other options except me. I pointed out to him that his medical bills were not a meager amount, and there was no way I could afford to clear them even with this job. This is when my dad suggested that I could perhaps sell my apartment so I could then use the money to cover his medical expenses. He claimed that his health was more important than any materialistic thing I might own, and that as his daughter, this was the least I could do for him. My mom too joined in, begging me to do this one last thing for them. She promised over and over that if I just paid off these medical debts, they would never ask me for anything ever again. She literally had tears in her eyes, swearing up and down that they would leave me alone forever if I helped them this final time. Honestly, the sheer entitlement in my dad's suggestion, coupled with my mom's theatrics, left me speechless for a moment. They truly were never satisfied. Every time, they just kept asking me for more and more. They truly believed that I owed them my life, that my achievements, my stability, and even my home were somehow theirs to claim whenever they needed them. Despite their apologies earlier, this moment laid bare the truth. They still saw me not as a person but as a lifeline, a resource to be used whenever they needed me. I wasn't even surprised. Deep down, I had always known this visit couldn't just be about reconnecting or making amends. It was always about what they could get from me. My dad's health was just another tool they were using to extract more from me. The truth was, even though I wanted my dad to live, at the end of the day, his health was his own responsibility. Dad had made his choices. He drank and gambled for years, neglecting his family and himself. So why should I help him by cleaning up his mess? Also, I had been sending them money for years, so why couldn't they just use that money during this medical emergency? So I confronted them outright, asking why they hadn't saved any of the money I sent them. My mom, looking flustered, tried to justify it. She explained how they had used the money to pay rent and groceries, which I could somewhat understand. But then she admitted that they had also used some of it for traveling. I asked them why they would do that instead of saving the money for their future, and Mom argued that she and Dad deserved to experience life since they'd never had the chance to live fully before. When I had started sending them $500, they could finally use that money however they wanted, so they used it to travel around and eat good food. She also justified that she and Dad had always assumed that they would eventually live with me as they got older because, after all, I was their child, and children are supposed to take care of their parents in their final years. Hearing that was the final straw. I shook my head in disbelief. Who says I'm going to take care of you and Dad when you're older? Definitely not me. Listen. What you did with my money over the years is your choice, I told them coldly. But don't come crying to me now when you are facing these issues because of your lack of planning. I'm not giving you another penny. My words seemed to hang in the air, heavy and final. My parents, realizing I was serious, tried to argue with me. My dad's frustration flared up again and my mom's tears resumed as she begged for me to reconsider, but I just leaned in and warned them. I think I'm done having this conversation. I want you to leave my house now. If you don't leave, I'll even cut off the $500 I send you every month. The room was silent. My threat had its intended effect. My parents stopped talking immediately. They knew I wasn't bluffing, and they knew they couldn't afford to lose the money I was already sending. Although they still looked pissed, they gathered their things and left me alone. Since they left, I talked to my boyfriend and some of my friends about it, and everyone seemed to think I was too harsh on my parents, especially with my dad's cancer diagnosis. They say I should be more compassionate and consider helping cover some of his bills at least. So Ida here. Update 1. Okay. There are 2 questions that most of you have asked under my post. Why did I give money to my parents all these years? I thought I made myself clear in my main post, but I'll say it again. Yes, I could have easily chosen not to send them any money, but I didn't want them to show up at my door or go to my coworkers or friends. Also, it just wasn't worth all the trouble of fighting with them. Instead, I gave them the $500 and that shut them up. They never asked for anything more and left me alone. $500 doesn't mean much to me since I've been working in corporate for years and steadily moving up through the ranks. Plus, being child-free, I have more than enough for myself. Why did I allow them to visit me? My dad is dying. That's inevitable. During our lunch, I could see it in his face and hear it in the way he talks. He doesn't look well, so I don't regret that I met them. I think deep down, I knew this was maybe my last chance to say what's been on my mind to my dad and make him realize how much he and Mom made me suffer. Also, they are my parents. Yes. They're incredibly toxic, and I don't love them in the way most people love their parents, but they are still my parents. I guess part of me just hoped that maybe they had changed, that they genuinely missed me or felt regret for how things turned out. Update 2. It's been 2 weeks since my last update. I thought after my last conversation with my parents that they wouldn't bother me anymore. However, turns out they hadn't left the city yet. My parents showed up at my doorstep today. It's the weekend, so I was at home enjoying some peace and quiet when I heard the doorbell ring. I was shocked to see my parents standing at my door through my Ring camera. I thought they were long gone by now. I opened the door a crack just to talk to them. My parents asked if they could come in, but I refused and asked them what they were doing here. This is when my mom started to say that she and my dad had stayed behind in my city for a few extra days, taking the time to explore. Apparently, over the course of their short stay, they had fallen in love with my city. She went on to talk about how it was so much better than where they lived, mentioning how even the doctors and hospitals here could offer more advanced treatment options for my dad's cancer. According to her, they had already visited 1 or 2 clinics and spoken to doctors who had given them hope about Dad's condition. Then my dad took over the conversation. He admitted he knew I didn't want anything to do with them, but this was apparently his last chance to live. He said he and Mom had decided to stay back and start treatment at one of the best hospitals in my city and wanted me to pay for his treatment. He demanded that because he and Mom would be staying here for a couple of months or maybe more, that I could either arrange a place for them or allow them to move in with me. He claimed that once he was cured, him and my mom would leave and go far, far away, freeing me of their burden forever. I looked at my dad like he had lost his mind and reminded him about our past conversation. I thought I had been clear enough. I told them that I didn't care where they wanted Dad to get treated, but that if they wanted to stay and get their treatment in this city, then they would have to pay for everything themselves. They were crazy to even assume that I was going to help out in any way. My mom argued, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and desperation, that if I didn't help them, they wouldn't leave my doorstep. That's when I realized they thought they could just force me to give in to their demands. They were actively trying to force me into a corner, thinking that they could emotionally manipulate me into giving in. I had had enough. I immediately closed my door and called the authorities on them. I reported my parents for harassing me. I wanted to teach them a lesson so they would think twice the next time before just showing up and pressuring me into helping them against my will. The police arrived soon after, and my parents were arrested when they started resisting the police officers and refused to leave my doorstep. I felt relieved once they were taken away. Also, I had to explain the situation to my neighbors who had witnessed the entire commotion outside my place. I live in a very peaceful neighborhood, so it's not every day that toxic parents show up, start demanding things from their kids, and refuse to leave until the police are called. Honestly, it's embarrassing that I have such irritating parents. Update 3. Thank you everyone for your kind comments. I am a bit shaken up after my parents showed up at my doorstep and refused to leave. After they were arrested, I immediately contacted a lawyer who helped me secure a restraining order against both my parents. With the video evidence I had of them threatening me at my door, it was clear I had a strong case against them. Getting a restraining order was a necessary measure to make sure they couldn't show up at my doorstep again. Necessary measure to make sure they couldn't show up at my doorstep again or cause any more emotional distress. My parents were released from jail since it was their first offense. They also had to agree with the police to leave me alone. On the advice of my lawyer, I have also made the necessary decision to stop sending them any more money. Clearly, I had enabled their toxic behavior for far too long, and after the way they had behaved, it was time for me to cut them off completely. I also talked to my boss and let him know the situation with my parents. I wanted to make sure he understood the gravity of things in case my parents ever showed up at my workplace to threaten me, which was a real concern. I didn't want this drama to jeopardize my career. Luckily, my boss is incredibly understanding, so I guess my job is safe. In the end, even though the situation with my parents is far from ideal, I feel like I've done what I needed to do to distance myself from them.